It's a concept that's central to life here in France, yet it's controversial and often misunderstood.
We're talking about laïcité, France's special brand of secularism, the separation of church and state.
Its backers say it's the glue that keeps the French together despite their differences. Its critics say it's anti-religious and increasingly used to stigmatize Muslims.
So is laïcité compatible with a modern multicultural society? Join us for this episode of French Connections Plus.
The word laïcité quite literally translates into secularism, the separation of church and state.
But the English word secularism doesn't really capture the complexity of laïcité.
Laïcité is a pillar of the Republic. It's so important. It's enshrined in the French Constitution.
Article 1 says that France is an indivisible, secular, democratic, and social republic.
French secularism has its roots in the 18th century with the philosophy known as the Enlightenment that promoted individual freedoms and equality that ultimately led to the French Revolution of 1789.
Now, after the Revolution, there were attempts to keep religion, particularly the Catholic Church, separate from state matters, but it didn't happen overnight.
It wasn't until 1905 that laïcité was signed into law, a law that's today the backbone of the French Republic.
And we often talk about this law from 1905, but what does it actually say? Let's take a look. Article 1 says that the Republic ensures freedom of conscience, but it's sometimes overshadowed by Article 2, which says that the Republic does not recognize, compensate, or subsidize any religion.
So that's what the law states. But what do the French really think or even know about laïcité? Flo, you went to find out more.
La laïcité, c'est de libre de croire à son Dieu ou ne pas croire, justement.
C'est assez complexe, mais tout le monde fait ce qu'il veut. Et puis, voilà quoi. Après, on est dans un pays où je trouve que la laïcité, c'est quand même important.
On est unis sans problème, sans parler forcément de toi tu crois en qui, toi voilà, donc du coup c'est cool.
Oui, actuellement il y a un climat un peu difficile, quoi, en particulier avec les problèmes de l'islamisme.
Dès lors qu'en fait il y a une disparité entre l'application de la laïcité par rapport à différentes religions, oui. Je pense qu'il y a un véritable danger en France.
En danger, je pense pas. Non, je pense pas qu'elle est en danger.
Comme partout, elle est en danger, mais c'est à nous de la conforter, de la rendre encore plus forte.
Je pense qu'il faudrait la moderniser en fonction des différentes croyances qu'il y a en France, parce qu'en 1905, la France avait certainement un profil qu'elle n'a plus maintenant.
Je pense que c'est la laïcité qui doit être prédominante, quoi, quelle que soit l'évolution de la société.
So how does laïcité play out in practice?
Well, quite simply, faith is seen as a private matter for each individual citizen. And as for the state and public space, well, I guess you could say it's a no-God zone.
This is very different than in many other places, like in the United States, where despite an official separation of church and state, many politicians wear their religion on their sleeves. There are prayers in Congress. You're sworn in on a Bible. The national motto is, "In God we trust." In France, there's none of that.
In fact, while they're on the job, civil servants are required to stay neutral when it comes to religion. And so that means all state employees, whether it's people who work in town halls or people who work for the public transport network or public school teachers, are prohibited from displaying signs of religion while they're at work.
This includes things like big Christian crosses, Jewish yarmulkes, Sikh turbans, and Muslim headscarves.
Now, critics say that France's strict secular laws are actually anti-religious and increasingly used to stigmatize Muslims. Initially, secular laws were put in place to keep the Catholic Church separate from state matters. But over the last century, things have changed. France has become a vibrant multicultural country, and Islam has emerged as France's second largest religion. In the past decades, legislation fine-tuning laïcité has caused impassioned public debate on just what secularism means. In 2004, in the name of laïcité, conspicuous religious symbols were banned from public schools. The idea being to keep public schools a neutral zone where kids are free to think and choose for themselves. There was also the controversial 2010 law banning full face veils or covering in public, commonly called the burqa or niqab ban. This in the name of safety so that the police could see people's faces in public. And the summer of 2016 was all about the so-called burkini fiasco. Some municipalities banned women wearing full-body covering bathing suits from public beaches for hygiene and security reasons. Critics of state secularism say it gives a free pass to France's Catholic cultural heritage. For instance, a lot of French bank holidays are Christian holidays. It begs the question, is there a double standard in France?
Recent opinion polls show most French people think secularism is in danger. In fact, there's overwhelming support for a government pledge to reinforce laïcité.
French President Emmanuel Macron wants to crack down on what he calls separatism that violates France's egalitarian values and spreads terrorist ideology. Because if you look at recent French history, the country certainly has been hit hard.
More than 260 people have been killed in Islamist terrorist attacks since 2012. Just recently, a French teacher, Samuel Paty, was beheaded after teaching a class in freedom of speech.
Now, what the government wants to do is reduce the space that radicals have to deviate from French Republican values. This with a series of new measures.
These include things like clamping down on online hate speech or carefully controlling the funding of religious associations like mosques.
Now, the government insists that it's not specifically targeting Muslims, but it is perceived that way by many, which begs the question, is French laïcité in a crisis? To find out more about French laïcité, I'm joined by Jean-Louis Bianco. You are the president of the Observatoire de la laïcité, so a secularism watchdog here in France. Your mission is to help the government promote and respect laïcité. Would you say that laïcité is in a crisis? Is it in danger?
The problem is that we live, as you very well know, in an opinion democracy. The reality is not so important as the image given by the medias, by the social networks. And when you hear about laïcité or read about laïcité, you almost only hear words, read words, crisis, crisis, danger, danger, danger. So it becomes a common truth. In fact, it resists very well. You know, it's a very old thing. It's, in my view, in view of many other people, including academics, an incredible good tool because it's general, you know. This universality, this abstraction makes the concepts resisting. And second reason, in practice, it works.
Why is it so touchy to talk about?
What is touchy is that, in fact, people have different conceptions, views about laïcité. The big debate is about neutrality. Neutrality is a very important point in French laïcité. The state, local authorities, all public services have to be neutral as well politically as religiously. This, in the French view, is a way of guaranteeing everybody is treated equally. But some people think it's not enough. It's not enough that it does exist for civil servants. So it should be extended. And it's a very big danger because the idea is that at the limit, at the extreme point, the society should be like. Or laïcité is not a religion.
Would you say that there's a double standard in France when it comes to the application of laïcité with respect to different religions? Some say that France actually has a problem with Islam. Would you agree with that?
No, I don't. I really don't believe that this is a thesis developed by some associations, that there is a Islamophobia from the state. I think it's absolutely false. But de facto, there are discriminations where Muslims and people living in suburbs are the most concerned. But it's not a general politics. And as far as religion practice is concerned, there is really equality. The problem is discrimination, is inequalities. It's not stigmatization of Muslims.
So how do you see the future of laïcité in France?
I'm rather optimistic, which can surprise considering the present debate. I strongly believe that there is a progress in conscience of people. People try to understand. And on the international scene, I'm struck by the variety of people who come and see us to discuss. Interesting, because if you believe in democracy or if you live in a political liberal country, the problems are the same. How can you give enough freedom without this freedom being dangerous for democracy? It's a problem of balance between freedoms, individual and collective freedoms. And I believe because it's universal, because it's abstract, French laïcité, adapted to the history, to the political will, to the decision of the people, can be an example, a solution for the future.
So you would say that the future looks bright for laïcité?
I believe so, but history will judge.
Well, thank you so much, Jean-Louis Bianco. Thank you for being on French Connections.
Many of you sent in your questions and comments about secularism, like Ryan Myers, who wanted to know, how do French ideas about laïcité affect education?
Well, French public schools have been secular since the Jules Ferry laws of the 1880s. The idea was to establish a safe zone where kids are free and equal to learn regardless of their religious or social background. And kids do learn about laïcité from a very young age in civics class.
Next, Elaine McCarthy wrote, I do love all those holidays in May. So instead of saying no to Catholic holidays, could France add Protestant and Muslim and Jewish holy days?
Well, it is a fair point and certainly would reinforce France's reputation of being very generous when it comes to public holidays. So bring it on. Great idea.
In all seriousness, though, France is still trying to come to grips with its post-colonial past and trying to figure out that today it is a multicultural society. And for many people, laïcité is just the best way of keeping the peace.
In fact, there have been calls to include laïcité in the French motto. Have it be liberté, égalité, fraternité, laïcité.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you have your own questions or comments, you can always write at Villeminot or reach out on social media.
And we'll see you next time for a new episode of French Connections Plus.